Fine. Just one of those days. Anyways, thank you everybody for being very patient. Trevor is here, or will be. He's just getting kind of set up here. He's in the background. Before we get started, I just want to read a land acknowledgement. As we gather here today, we acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. And of course, now I have blanked out because of all this. 1 second. We pay our respects to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place. So thank you again. Sorry for that confusion, kerfuffle with myself. So this webinar today is GST, everything about GST, and we have Trevor King with Prairie Paget out of Rostern, Saskatchewan. And this program is being offered through the Indigenous Business Development Services as well as Sage Hill Community Futures. And Jenny Glessman is here with Sage Hill.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll keep it short because we're running a little behind. We're here located in Bruno. We're here to help people with loans, advice, and support. And one of the things we do is workshops like today. And we're excited to have Trevor back. He's joined us numerous times. So without that, I'm just going to turn it over to you, Trevor, and let's talk about the wonderful topic of GST. Oh, we can't hear you. I can see your lips moving, but I can't hear you. Sorry. This is our first session for our new year, and this is a good way to start.
Yeah, it's really great. What you can do, Trevor, is call in with your cell phone. I will just give you that information.
How about that?
Oh, yep. There you are. Hey,
there we go.
Hi. Great. We'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Okay. So, my name is Trevor King. I'm one of the senior partners with Prairie Paget Tax Accounting here in Rostern. This is one of several webinars that I do for Community Futures. We also do PST, small business deductions. I think we're doing when to incorporate. I have to check my calendar. Yes, Rhonda runs my calendar. So yeah, my full-time job, I work as an accountant, and we are in the middle of tax season. But GST is one of those things that can put most people to sleep because it's pretty dull stuff. But I do have a little interesting thing to add towards the end. So as far as the businesses we have online here today,
we have a really good mixture. We have actually some RMs and a couple of towns, and then some just different types of businesses. So we got quite a good mix today.
So if you guys have questions, you can add them in the chat, or you can we'll have some time at the end for some question and answers. Or if it's something I can't if I can't answer it off the top of my head, I will say, you know what, I need to look that up and I'll get back to you. But if you guys are good with it, I'd like to start with the presentation because apparently my tech savviness does not extend to using Zoom. So can you make me a presenter?
Oh, yes. Jessica, you'll have to do that.
Where am I here? Nope. No, I think I have the ability to share screen now. So
good. Yeah, you should be good.
Okay. Entire screen. Okay, are you guys seeing my screen now or no?
No.
Not yet.
No. Okay. We're not working here. Entire screen. Okay, there we go.
We got it.
Okay, so normally I'm just kind of getting adjusted to having one screen, but normally I work off of two. So can everyone see this?
We sure can.
Okay, so again, Prairie Paget Tax and Accounting is the name of my company. Trevor King's my first name, and we're going to get on the right. So we're going to go through the basis of GST, how input tax credits work, collecting and remitting your GST, remittance and filing dates. That's a very important thing that some people always seem to miss. And then what is a GST merry-go-round? Now, that's something that's come up in the news in the last 6 months or so. But I'll explain that's more of a fun thing to know at the end. All right, so your GST basics. GST is charged on all taxable sales of goods and services within Canada. You have to start charging GST once you exceed $30,000 over 4 consecutive quarters or $30,000 in a single quarter. Now, the old rule of thumb used to be once you hit $30,000 in annual revenue, CRA would just send you a GST number and you'd be required to collect and remit GST on their behalf. So all your GST numbers are registered with Revenue Canada. It's the same as your business number if you're incorporated, same as your payroll number. It just has a different letter code, and then it'll be RT, RC, 0001, or if you have several different GST accounts, it can have different ending numbers. Reporting periods are annually, quarterly, or monthly if your revenue's high enough. Quarterly is just calendar quarter. Now, this calendar quarter reporting requirement is for people that have a December 31st year end, or if you're a sole proprietor. Corporations will have different year end dates and thus different GST filing dates. Now, you can voluntarily register for a GST number. Why would someone want to do that? Sometimes it's a requirement if you're applying to work for government entities. It can add legitimacy to your business that you are registered for GST, because typically you'll already be registered for PST if you're over the $10,000 threshold required for that. But there is a voluntary registration, so you can take advantage of the input tax credits. Now, input tax credits. Does anyone know what an input tax credit would be? I can't see the chat. All I can see is my presentation screen.
I'm watching. I'll watch the chat for you, Trevor. GST paid, somebody is saying.
Okay. Yep, that's right. So GST paid on either inventory for your business if you're in a retail operation where you're buying and reselling, or any GST paid on services or equipment required. So input tax credit, you can basically claim back the amount of GST you paid or payable on purchases and expenses related to commercial activities. So this would be if you hire a consultant and they charge you GST, GST on power bills for your office building. Again, like all expenses related to business, it has to be reasonable in quality, nature, and cost in relation to the nature of your business. Now, when you get your GST number, that is the day you can start collecting and claiming input tax credits, the day you receive the number. Now, there are very few exceptions to this rule. CRA has backdated some numbers in the past. I've seen it with one client but that was only so they could charge them GST and collect the net benefit. It wasn't to allow you to have a claim back credit. So CRA won't issue you a GST number if they figure that they're going to owe you more money than they're going to collect. Now, what about a capital cost allowance? What if I buy a large asset? How does the GST work with something like that? Say you buy commercial vehicle. How do you get your GST back? Is it prorated like your depreciation would be? Does anyone know the answer to this?
Everybody's quiet. Nothing in the chat.
Crickets, eh? Okay. Well, if you're buying, yeah. So do you claim it back as you depreciate the asset on a declining balance scale? And that's actually not how it is done. So when you make a large capital purchase, oftentimes you'll be looking at your invoice. There'll be amount paid. There'll be PST if it's subject to PST. Some things won't be because they're being bought for resale or they're bought out of province. That's a whole nother bag of tricks. And then GST will be separately. So what you do is you claim back the amount of GST you paid at the time the purchase was made. Even if it's financed, even if you're making payments on it, you still claim all the GST back in whatever reporting period it was expended in. And then your asset goes on your books at the full purchase price. So everything you paid less the GST you paid or you claimed back. Right? So that can be a little difficult to wrap your head around, right? Because if you buy something, oh, it was 70 grand tax in. Well, actually, you have to work the GST out of that because that's not what your actual asset value is, even though that's what you paid, because you get the GST credit back right away. Now, you have 4 years to claim your GST from the initial due date of your remittance period. Now, this typically only affects people that don't collect GST on behalf of the government. This would be your farmers, anyone who works in a GST exempt area, childcare providers, new changes under the GST rules for counseling and psychologists. They don't have to collect GST anymore. Or if you're what's called an interliner. So an interliner is a transport truck operator that moves goods from one area to the other, but never to the final customer. Typically, they're involved in transporting agricultural equipment. That's all GST exempt. So these businesses like that will build up huge GST credits, especially if they don't file, because let's face it, if you don't owe the government any money, they're not going to start hassling you for it, right? And you only have 4 years to claim your GST. Otherwise, you basically have to give up that credit. Now, that being said, if you owe GST and neglect to remit it, they will go back until all your reporting periods are filed. So the 4-year rule doesn't apply if you owe GST. Only applies if you're claiming credits back. Now, your sales invoices have to reflect your GST number. You should always have it on there because some companies will look up your GST number to see if you're actually registered or if you're just trying to, tag them for another 5%. This information required for sales invoices typically only applies in business to business instances, sometimes business to final customer, like terms of payment that should be on your invoice. My recommendation is put due on receipt. Descriptions, again, if it's over $150, you need to have a description on your invoice. Trade names. So under $30, you don't need your business number. But I recommend when you set up your invoicing system, just put your GST number in there. It's easy enough to do, and it adds legitimacy to your company. Okay, we've gone through quite a bit, quite in a short number of slides. Does anyone have any questions right now?
At the moment, I don't see anything.
Okay.
Nope.
So, and this is by no means is this a comprehensive list of zero rated supplies. And I'm going to provide a copy of the presentation to Sage Hill, and they can distribute it out if anyone wants to look through it. So some items are GST exempt. Your basic groceries, agricultural products, fisheries, prescription drugs, exports. And exports is an interesting thing. We're going to touch on that when I go over what a GST merry-go-round is. So within Canada, if you're providing a service within the confines of Canada, even if it's a digital one, you have to charge GST if you're registered. Now, if you're an exporter and you're providing services outside of Canada, you're not required to charge GST on that item. Those would be considered GST exempt. Right? This is other things that are GST exempt: house sales, childcare services, educational services like secondary education, university, music lessons, insurance policies. Although insurance policies, that may change because a couple of years ago, the Saskatchewan government decided to add PST to insurance. And then services provided by governments, nonprofit organizations, municipalities typically don't charge GST. With regards to residential water. Now, the interesting thing is, I have a client who does transports water. Oh, we are going all over the place here. All right. I have a client who transports water. And while the water itself is not taxable, technically the transportation part is. So what they do is they chalk it up just as water sales, and then they're not required to charge the GST. So a thing about GST, some people will treat it like income, and that is a very, very terrible habit to get into. As a registrant, you're responsible for collecting the GST and remitting it to Revenue Canada when it's due. You hold the money in trust. Now, you are allowed to claim back your input tax credits. So total amount of GST collected less your input tax credits equals the amount you have to remit. Now, to be very clear, GST is not your money. It's not counted as income, and it has to be returned to Revenue Canada. You're basically holding on to it for them until your reporting period ends. Now, GST is not applied to supplies made outside Canada, zero-rated exports, zero-rated supplies of financial services, anything that's listed as exempt, taxable sales of capital property, and goodwill. Goodwill is a way, is basically like buying a business name and reputation. That's what's considered goodwill, and that's not taxable to GST because it's very subjective. Now, reporting periods. If you're less than 1.5 million, you're going to have an annual reporting period, and that's 1.5 million in sales. Between 1.5 and 6, you're going to have to file quarterly. And if you're selling more than $6 million a year, you're going to have to file monthly. Now, you can opt out and report monthly or quarterly. Depends how good you are at managing your cash flow and how on top of keeping track of your GST credits you are. Hey, does anyone have any questions right now before I go any further?
Yes, there is a big one in the chat. Last year, we were told that we were required to pay a quarterly amount based on the previous year's GST collected, levied a penalty because of whatever rule they came up with. How will I know how much I'm supposed to remit this year? Side the thing is, side note, if it matters, we're a municipality that gets a 100% rebate and only are allowed to claim this annually. Used to be semi-annual prior to the change in remitting we fell under.
So I'm assuming CRA would have notified you that you had a reporting period due? Oh man, that's a...
Yeah, I'm just gonna, Joni, do you mind unmuting? Do you want to chat with Trevor?
Sure, I can. And actually, if this doesn't apply to anyone else, I can always call in later too. But yeah, no, we weren't actually notified this until after it was all of a sudden we sold too much gravel. So we made more than the $50,000. And so then we needed to start collecting it. And then the next year we made even more than that because we did a whole bunch of extra custom work. And apparently I was supposed to be remitting quarterly instead of just the annual stuff that I was. So then, yeah, they went back afterwards and said, okay, you owe us penalty for these 3 quarters and now pay this amount every quarter to kind of keep up with things. I don't know how much I'm supposed to pay this year because of course, last year was different than the year before.
Oh, they're assessing you a GST remittance amount. They're not waiting for you to calculate it. They just kind of gave you a blanket assessment and said, pay this much every
Yeah,
quarter.
they said $1,155 every quarter. And then last year, then I overpaid about $2,000 because the year prior was an anomaly, but I'm just not sure how to like, where to go.
Yeah, this is so they should send you your reporting periods. And then you can like, I mean, you know what you're bringing in for GST and you know what your claimable amounts would be on your expenditures. So I mean, it should just be a straight GST claim as far as like,
But with
you
the
have your
rebate,
first.
with the municipal rebate, we're only allowed to do it once a year. Now that they changed me to this quarterly thing where I'm collecting GST, I'm only allowed to actually remit the municipal rebate once a year.
So that's probably.
And maybe this is really kind of specific, so I don't want to tie up everybody else's time based on this question either.
Yeah, so your municipal rebate would probably only apply in your final 4th quarter is when they would want that filed, but that's an interesting problem. My contact information is at the end here. If you want to, you can send me an email and I can actually get into the
Yeah, we'll do that then.
This part because it is a very, very specific question.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for bringing it up though. I appreciate it. Okay, so remitting your GST to Revenue Canada.
You hear me? I had a question.
Oh,
Okay.
yes, go ahead. Sorry.
No problem. So here's my question. If a company selling to another business, and both of them have GST numbers, and one of them is going to remit them money to the government and the other one is going to collect it back from the government, why even bother having the GST system for those two, like business to business in the first place, if it's literally coming in one door at the CRA and going out the other?
Oh, you want me to explain why our government made a tax decision? That's you bring up a good point, and that is we're going to get into this part later. Actually, how you end up in a GST merry-go-round, but basically, because GST is only actually finally paid by the final customer, right? So everyone pays it and we all pass it along until the final consumer buys it. And then they're the ones that actually pay the GST. It's an input tax credit system, I think, so the government can capture the increase in between from one company to another. Like I buy from you and then I mark it up 50% and I sell it to the next guy, right? They get that gain from one to the other. and then it's finally paid by the end consumer. But yeah, I believe that we should be able to buy stuff GST exempt, much like the PST system. But that's kind of the rules we got to play within, unfortunately. But it does end up generating a lot more work.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's okay. How do you remit your GST? The easiest way is through your online banking system. You have to file it online through the GST HSC net file system. You can use Telefile if you want to, but I highly recommend. I highly recommend that you be very patient because that system is archaic and very difficult to use. Ensure that you're remitting within your reporting deadline. Statutory holidays can affect when your deadline actually is, as well as weekends. Monthly, if you have to remit monthly, your GST is due 1 month after your reporting period. Same with if you're required to remit quarterly. Now, where it gets confusing is if you have to have a December 31st year end and you have an annual December 31st year end, your payment's due on the 30th if you owe, and then you have to file by the 15th of June. This is set up that way specifically for farm clients because lots of them are sole proprietorships, means they have a December 31st year end. And farm clients always get a GST refund because there's no GST applied to livestock or grain sales. So if they owe, which couldn't occur, they got to pay by the 30th, but then they got to file by June 15th in order to claim their credits back. And any of the other fiscal years, it's 3 months after year end. These are your corporations that have a different year end than December 31st. So 3 months after their year end, their GST's got to be in. Now, does anybody know what you do if you can't pay your GST?
Run.
Crickets again.
You phone them.
Yes.
Pay the
Okay.
penalty, somebody said.
Yeah, well, there's a saying about a creek and no paddle, which is pretty much where you are. Yes, you call Revenue Canada immediately. They'll allow you to make payments, which means you won't get annoying phone calls. But until it's paid in full, it would continue to accrue interest unless you qualified for unusual circumstances or financial hardships. And if you're going to go that route, you have to disclose your entire financial situation as well as all of your assets. And they may give you some leniency. It's worth a shot if that's the way you have to go. But it's very difficult to get them to start waiving interest penalties. My recommendation, ensure you use a tax account in the future. Put your GST in, all the GST you collect in there, put it in that account, and then use the credit as a small savings system. That's what we do. We do a profit and loss tax accrual every month, and then we take that amount and we just transfer it to a liability account, and it just sits there. That way, when we have to pay our PST or our GST, we have the money sitting there, so it's not such a big hit. Okay, now.
Before you go there, Trevor, there is one question.
Yeah.
It says HST for leased vehicles, 5-year term. What do we do?
HST for leased vehicles. If the HST is built into your lease payment, you claim it back for every lease payment you make. Depends how the deal is structured. If you look on your financing options or your financing document, if the GST was payable all at once, you claim it back. But it should be on your lease payment because you don't technically own the asset It really depends if you buy it out at the end or not. But I would just take the portion of the payment that is GST, HST, and use that amount for your reporting periods. Does that answer your question?
I think so. It was in the chat. I think so. So we.
Okay. Okay, so the new changes to GST. GST HST has been removed from professional services by psychotherapists and counseling therapists. In order to stimulate the economy, the government has also removed GST from the construction of new rental apartments. And another change they've made that has really angered up some of my farm clients who are on the older side, it's mandatory electronic filing. You cannot file your GST on paper anymore. They will not accept it, which is kind of frustrating given that some of these people have been collecting and remitting GST this way for the past, 30, 40 years. Now they have to learn a new way to do it, or they have to find someone to do it for them. Now, GST is a lot easier than PST to figure out when you have to charge it. But basically, if you're selling within Canada, tack the GST on there. If you're selling outside Canada, it's zero rated goods. There's no charge, no GST applied. This is for equipment, products, services outside of Canada, no GST. Now, as far as who is exempt, and this is right from the CRA's website. I don't like the terms they use, but that's how the government has it structured. So if goods are bought on a reserve by someone who has a treaty number or is a band or a band empowered entity, they are GST exempt. Now you can buy goods off reserve, provided they are delivered to the reserve and the vendor is supplied with a treaty number. So, and as well as this specifically to incorporated band empowered entities, these would be the First Nations bands themselves. They can buy goods off reserve, provided they're for band management activities, and the proper documentation is presented to the vendor. Then it is GST exempt. If you buy goods off reserve, even though you have a treaty number, they have to be delivered. Otherwise, GST is applicable. Now, lots of companies have gotten into quite a bit of hot water as to whether they have to charge GST or not for people that present them with a treaty number. And my advice that I give my clients who work with First Nations communities is make sure you deliver the product on reserve land, and make sure you get confirmation of a treaty number, add that to the invoice and where it was delivered, and that for when you get audited, because if you're doing quite a bit of business out there, you will be subject to an audit. It's pretty likely. Okay, does any of our businesses or communities here work with First Nations groups in a business to business capacity? No one?
No one said anything in the chat.
Okay. All right. Now, this is an interesting topic because, like we discussed before, why do we have this GST business to business collection if I'm just going to turn around and have to remit it and you're going to have to collect it? So does anyone know what a GST merry-go-round is?
No, but you've got me really curious.
Yeah, so this was kind of, I mean, we discussed this. I was at a conference in Montreal in 2023, and we kind of discussed that this was starting to happen and had been happening for some time. And then W5 actually I think it was W5 did a story on it. So basically, and this was focused on a telecom company, but it would apply to a lot of other businesses as well. Whoever was actually behind it set up several dummy corporations, for lack of a better term, like they only existed on paper. And I mean, if you have a mailing address and someone's social insurance number on a laptop, you can set them up quite easily. And then what they were doing is they were buying telephone minutes for like a global telecommunications company, and then they were exporting them out of the country. Right? The first person would buy it, turn around and sell it to these two paper corporations that didn't really exist, and then they would turn around and claim that they sold it to a subsidiary outside of Canada, claim the GST credit back, right? Because they're an exporter. And then the first two companies, when it came time to remit the GST, basically had dissolved. So Revenue Canada figures they had lost an estimated $1.1 billion in fraudulent GST claims. Now that I've told you how the system works, I'm going to put this disclaimer out there that this is fraud and you will not do it. Does anyone have any questions about a GST merry-go-round?
No, we just had a comment in the chat. It says, I don't want to say this to everyone. Oh, okay. Well, I'll leave this one. Nope.
Okay. Now, if you need help or you have questions, I highly recommend you call CRA Business Inquiries line. If you're not sure where your business, like, do I need to register? Do I need to charge? This is kind of what my business does. And they're actually quite helpful as long as you're patient in getting through to them on the phone, or they'll be able to direct you in the right way. Now, if you need help with like figuring out how much GST do I owe, how do I work out my reporting periods, how do I set up invoicing systems and manage my input and output tax credits, find someone you trust, find someone you can work with, find someone that understands how your business operates. That's 90% of this job, is understanding how people's businesses actually operate. You can book an appointment with us. My admin email is up there. That's my office line right there. If you have I have a question that I didn't want to ask, or I don't want to put it in the chat, everything is confidential. If you just need help, or you want to bounce some ideas off someone, I'm more than happy to extend that to you guys. Okay. There. Now I'm going to stop sharing. Now we can get back into the questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to unmute or put them in the chat, whichever.
There.
So Trevor, this is a fairly easy system online for people to navigate on their own.
Which is a fairly, like registering for a GST number?
Yeah, and claiming your GST and all that.
Yeah, it's fairly straightforward. I mean, the biggest thing I find is people will get their net file number. It's a 4-digit code that's specific to you and your business, and then they lose it. So then they have to call and they have to get another net file number. And like really, it's like 4 data entry points to net file your GST. It's your gross earnings, your input tax credits, GST collected, and then if you have any imported items you need to declare the GST on. But that's it. Yeah, it's not overly difficult. Some people can find it really intimidating to figure out, or they're worried, what if I make a mistake? You will make a mistake. It'll happen. It's not a big deal. as long as you, when you realize, oh, I've made an error or whatever, I claimed too much. As long as you notify CRA, they'll let you go back and you can do what's called a refile for GST. And then you can correct your mistake. They're usually pretty good about it as far as helping you to do that. Now, what you don't want to do is make a mistake, realize you made a mistake, and then not do anything with it.
Mm.
Right?
Are they quite forgiving, like in terms of the penalties and things that, like
No.
late fees? Okay.
No, there's zero give there.
I do have a question. If it's a new business getting started, you used to be able to just call in and they would give you a GST number over the phone. Do they still do that?
Yep.
Okay. Because I have
because
people asking that.
Yeah, you'd be able to call the business inquiries line. That's the 1-800 number I had up at the end there. And you just tell them, I need a GST number. This is the name of my business. If it's a sole proprietorship, the GST number will be tied to your name. But I mean, really all you'll do is give them your social insurance number, some other identifying items, and they'll give you a GST number. They will, the first time, they mail you the net file code. But after that, once you have it and have filed once, if you need to change it, you can always call in. You have to answer a bunch of questions, but you'll be able to get it again if you lose it. What we do with my GST clients is we'll prepare their GST return on a spreadsheet, and then in their client file, we just add their net file number in on a sheet. So, because they're going to lose it. I mean, it happens. People lose stuff. It's one of those things. But yeah, they're really easy to get set up with. But no, they're not forgiving.
I know we tell lots of our clients about how you were talking about a separate account, moving your GST funds into that separate account, just so that you don't get yourself in trouble, because it's easy to spend it when it's in your account. I mean, it's in your main checking account.
Oh, and I mean, business, that's what determines whether businesses live or die, is their ability to cash flow items, right? Like if they have, you have one really big busy season, right? Especially if your business is cyclical, right? Like ours, for example, our busiest 3 months are right now, right? So we bring in lots of GST and PST, and when I think ours is October, mine's due October, November, somewhere in there. Anyways, that's our slower time of year. So yeah, it's really tempting to like, oh, we'll spend it on capital assets or improvements, or we're going to bring on more staff, and then all of a sudden you go to pay your GST and you come up short. Man, you're going to be in a world of hurt.
Does anyone have any other questions for Trevor? If not seeing anything, I'd just like to thank everybody for joining in. Sorry about our little glitches at the beginning. Trevor's back. I don't know the date, and he'll be talking about all the fun stuff about PST.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
in May. Mm-hmm.
In May, yes. So with that, I'd like to thank Trevor, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. We will be sending the presentation out. Today has been recorded, and we have a YouTube channel on our Sage Hill website where all of these are saved. So if there's something you missed or you want to go back and rewatch it, it will be saved there. So I'd just like to thank everybody for joining on behalf of Sage Hill and IBDS. Thank you, and we look forward to having you back, Trevor.
Thank you. So it was always nice meeting with you guys.
Thank you very much. And there is also a survey that will pop up after the Zoom session closes, and I'll send a follow-up email with that YouTube link and a link to our collection of other IBDS webinars that are coming up.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.